Welcome to the world of antique buttons. This 45-minute presentation is conceived to give an overview of the history of buttons, which in turn will offer some insight into the many reasons that people collect them. This presentation is brought to you by the National Button Society. For more information about our organization, visit our website at nationalbuttonsociety.org. You will learn a bit more about the opportunities for education, enjoyment, and community that we provide to our 2,000 plus members around the world. This painting is a wonderful example from the Dutch Golden Age that hangs in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. While they may not be particularly noticeable at first, there is a wealth of buttons in this painting, a total of 182 of them. The painting reminds us that in the 17th and 18th centuries, buttons were worn almost exclusively as an adornment for men's clothing. As you can see in the painting, they were used to fasten breeches, waistcoats, sleeves, and other garments. Women's garments during this period were far more likely to be fastened by laces. Buttons are so commonplace and taken for granted that collectors are often asked why we collect them. There are as many answers to that question as there are button collectors, but one thing we all share is an appreciation of the artistry and creativity that went into creating them. Or, as Diana Epstein and Millicent Safro put it, in their collecting, they represent our ever-present desire to find the extraordinary in the commonplace. Over the centuries, buttons have been made all over the world, and they were made by the greatest craftsmen of their time, displayed as symbols of wealth, position, and self-expression. They were considered the finest jewelry, and up until the 19th century, worn almost exclusively by men. Great care was taken to make sure these buttons were not lost and passed down through the generations. The fact that so many have survived to this day is a testament to this fact. Let's take a look at some buttons from the primary regions that produced them from the 15th to the 19th centuries. We'll start off in England. Over the centuries, any number of different kinds of buttons have been made in England and the United Kingdom. The first group seen here are what collectors call Battersea or Bristol enamels, depending where they were made. They are an example of the technique of émaux peint, or painted enamel, which was first mastered in France before spreading to England in the 1700s. These buttons are from the 19th century and are often referred to by collectors as Birmingham trade buttons. Birmingham was a great center for button production in the 19th and early 20th centuries. These buttons do not bear maker's marks, and there is thus no absolute way of knowing that they were in fact made in the Birmingham factories. Nevertheless, they share common construction traits that make this a reasonable assumption. Their small size indicates that they were likely worn on Victorian and Edwardian gentlemen's waistcoats. These buttons were made in a wide variety of materials and combinations of materials. In this group, you can see some embellished with paste, celluloid, and fabric. There's no way to overstate the contribution France made in elevating the button from craft to fine art, most notably in 18th century Paris. The French advanced and invented decorative techniques for buttons. This group of buttons from that time represents a variety of materials and techniques. This large button is a painting of great detail under glass, possibly on vellum, set under glass in metal. Here's an exquisite monochromatic painting on ivory button. Note the subject matter of this button. In the 1700s in France, bird catching was a metaphor for the pursuit of love. Images of women playing with captive birds were emblematic of the total submission of lovers to their mistresses. The expression being tied down is still used today to describe a romantic relationship in which one person is so smitten with the other that they are at their mercy. This copper button features a central medallion of deep blue enamel. The flower heads are composed of seed pearls, with white paint added to create the bow and stems. This enamel button features another distinctly French enameling technique, the use of paillons. These tiny receptacles of pressed metallic foil are painstakingly filled with a dot of enamel. This button is made of pierced and carved mother of pearl with a glass center jewel and border of blue pastes. Next is a passementerie button that illustrates the French expertise in working with metal thread and foils. This is a porcelain button with gilt. And finally, this is another finely detailed painting on ivory. France continued to make wonderful buttons on into the 19th and 20th centuries. Many of these more modern buttons relied more on mechanical and industrial production methods rather than hand craftsmanship, though the pearl button in this group shows that the artisan's hand could still be an important part in the process of making buttons at that time. While the country now known as Czechia has gone through many name changes over the years, manufacturers in the area have always been known for their excellence in glasswork. The buttons they made are no exception. The buttons in this first group are antique buttons that collectors refer to as lacy glass. They are most often made of clear glass with a finely stippled surface design. Their backs are painted with colored paint or gold or silver luster, and then sealed with a thick coat of black paint. Compare them to their more contemporary counterparts. These buttons were sometimes made from the same molds that were used in the 19th century, but can usually be distinguished from their earlier counterparts by their brighter, more exuberant color palettes. These vintage buttons are from the 1990s. Romans were making glass and enamel buttons for centuries. But from the 18th century to the middle of the 19th century, a renewed interest in button making in Italy produced some wonderful expressions of the craft. This was an outgrowth of the Grand Tour, an educational rite of passage for young British men of means. Italy, with its opportunities to study its classical antiquity, was one of its key destinations. Buttons were precious tokens and keepsakes of the journey and brought back as gifts for loved ones. This group is a collection of micro-mosaics made from tiny glass tesserae. Mosaic work goes back to ancient history and reached its pinnacle in the Byzantine Empire. It wasn't until the mid-1700s that craftsmen started experimenting with minute tesserae to create what are referred to now as micro-mosaics. Cameo carving from lava stone was very popular in Italy in the 19th century. The lava from Mount Vesuvius that covered the ruins of Pompeii was a good material for carving cameos and intaglio and made great souvenirs for tourists. Pietradura, an Italian art form of inlaid, colored, and differently shaped stones into a backing, originated in ancient Rome, where it was used to decorate floors and walls. The technique featured both geometric and figurative designs. This is a 19th century example. Japan, like Italy, produced beautiful buttons largely as an outgrowth of Western tourism in the 19th century. In 1868, Japan opened to Western influence and travel for the first time since the early 17th century. While traditional dress in Japan had little use for buttons, they recognized an opportunity in making them for Western tourists. Traditional Japanese arts, hundreds, if not thousands of years old, were applied to buttons. As these examples will show, the results were beautiful. The first group shows the Ginbari enamel technique. Ginbari buttons have great depth to them created by the silver leaf backing. The silver is stamped, punched, or otherwise textured, and reflects light through the enamel almost like a stained glass window. Shakudo is an alloy of copper with a small amount of gold. Its earliest known use was in the 12th century to decorate samurai swords. The large button shows a popular Japanese adaptation of the Chinese faux dog, or lion dog. They were popular architectural elements, often at the entrance to a home, palace, or other building that were thought to have protective powers. The second button has a shakudo element set on ivory. Satsuma pottery was first made in the province of the same name in the 16th century. These buttons reflect the look that evolved over time with a crackled glaze and heavy gold stippling. In the years of the American colonies, most buttons were imported from England, but as the colonies grew, button manufacturing took hold from the early 1700s in New England. Most of those buttons were of metal and utilitarian in nature. It was the 19th century that marked the real growth of button making in the United States, especially starting in 1855 with the manufacture of shell buttons. The Mississippi River supplied most of the shell, and Muscatine, Iowa was at the heart of the industry. It was hailed as the pearl button capital of the world. A 1916 report on the button trade in the U.S. identifies freshwater pearl buttons as the most important branch of the industry, representing 45.4% of the total output. These early button cards are from many of the key factories of the time. The pearl button industry may have been a showcase for new manufacturing methods, but the buttons were hardly examples of American creativity. The opposite can be said of the native Navajo, who are recognized for their beautiful work in silver and turquoise. Commercialization of their work began around the turn of the 20th century when the Fred Harvey Company ordered Navajo silverwork to sell to tourists. Harvey and his company became leaders in promoting tourism in the American Southwest, promoting the region by creating the Indian curio shops. The buttons shown here are vintage from the early 20th century and illustrate some chiseled and punched designs common to their work. We get a glimpse into both social and fashion history by way of this 18th century etching. Cut steel accessories were the rage of the 1700s, given steel's ability to replicate the sparkling effects of cut diamonds and precious metals. Cut steel provided a way to get around sumptuary laws of the time and make a bit of bling accessible to the less wealthy. The French fashion for eye-catching buttons grew and they became increasingly large and dazzling. This trend became the subject of satirists, as illustrated by this 1777 print entitled Coup de Bouton, which shows a dashing young gentleman's buttons blinding a young lady passing by. Was she impressed? One can say that the French turned love into an art, and these buttons from the 18th century illustrate this sentiment. The large button is painting on ivory, probably commemorating the couple's wedding. It is signed CF and dated 1697 on the pedestal, but the button is believed to be circa 1770 to 1780. The other three buttons are rebus buttons. Rebuses were used as discreet messages about the male wearer's romantic conquests and tribulations. In the example on the left, which is painted under glass, we see the rebus Elle a blessé mon cœur. She has wounded my heart. Below that, on a carved mother of pearl example, we see the rebus Elle a cédé, which means she has given in. And finally, the third example on the upper right, we see l'ami de mon cœur, the friend of my heart, or my heart's friend. In the past, as well as today, memorializing lost loved ones was often done through personal adornment, though mourning buttons, which were specifically created and worn for the time of mourning, are now a thing of the past. The three buttons on the left are from the 18th century and depict common visual themes for mourning buttons. The button on the lower left is a silvered copper example etched with an urn. The button to the right is also copper with painted ivory under glass of a woman at an urn on a pedestal. And the third is a shell under glass with hair and painted leaves to form a wreath and bouquet. The two brass 19th century buttons also include hair woven into a basket pattern. It's also interesting to note that Queen Victoria's long and very public grief over Prince Albert's death in 1861 ultimately launched the manufacture and widespread use of black glass buttons, imitating the Queen's jet buttons. Regardless of their decoration, all fine buttons in the 18th and 19th centuries were worn as symbols of wealth, as only the wealthy could afford them. But some buttons were distinctly created with this purpose in mind. These buttons are from the 19th century. Collectors refer to them as jewels. The blue button is enamel and the others are glass. All have paste borders. These are livery buttons from the 19th century. Liveries or uniforms were worn by servants of the very wealthy to publicly display their status and family affiliation. They depict heralds, crests, badges, and monograms. Sporting buttons were worn on jackets and coats, often in sets of various designs, like the engraved mother of pearl set on the right. The brass buttons on the left aren't technically sporting buttons as defined by the NBS because they weren't worn on hunt coats, but they do portray sporting subjects which were in vogue at the time, both with the classes who had the means to participate in hunts as well as those who aspired to emulate those classes. Note the woman riding side saddle and the fallen horse and rider. All are from the 19th century. Political associations on buttons could be overt or subtle. This copper button is the most revered American button. It commemorates our first president, with each of the 13 colonies artfully linked as the button's border. This is one of an extremely rare set of what is thought to be 27 designs. They were issued to and worn by significant attendees of George Washington's inaugural ceremony. GW buttons, as they are known by collectors, set record prices when one happens to show up at auction. As just one example, when a collection of political and presidential Americana went up for auction in 2018, it produced the world's most valuable Washington button with a high bid of $225,000. It featured a stamped bust of Washington and the words Pater Patriae, a Latin phrase meaning father of his country. These are called Jacksonians. They are always small, one-piece gilt buttons with separate rims. Most are pictorial. They get their name from the era when they were popular, the 1820s and 1830s, when Andrew Jackson was president. Not all the designs are political per se, but they are all of a particular political period. Here is a Liberty button. These buttons were indistinguishable from the standard issue military uniform buttons, allowing a soldier to pass inspection while holding two pictures of loved ones close to his heart. Made by the Liberty Manufacturing Company in Los Angeles, they sold for 75 cents. Buttons made during the French Revolution of 1789 and those made a century later to commemorate it are favorites for some collectors. So the scene on the large button is hand-painted on paper and under glass, showing the storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789. At the top of the scene is a banner saying Le despotisme abattu, or despotism struck down. The small metal button to its upper right is a military button from the Revolution. Both are 18th century. The others are 19th century reproductions of 18th century buttons made to commemorate the centennial of the French Revolution. Throughout their history, buttons, most fundamentally, were used either as surface adornment or to secure garments. It's extremely rare to find one from before 1800 still attached to its original garment. Buttons were essentially the same as jewelry and removed from a garment no longer worn or given away so that they could adorn a new one. Seeing a button preserved in its original context breathes life into the button itself. The degree to which they were meticulously crafted to complement a specific textile is remarkable. This slide shows passementerie buttons on a stomacher. These would not have been functional, but decorative. The stomacher would have been laced onto the body. These embroidered buttons on the coat and waistcoat complement the ensemble perfectly. It would be unthinkable today to ride in such an exquisite riding habit as this, but it must have been quite an elegant sight going over a fence in pursuit of the game. These buttons appear to be gilt metal wound with golden thread. Or they may be like the first set of passementerie with gold thread and sequins to match the detail of the coat. These buttons appeal to be steel mounted with cut steels around a central disc of mother of pearl. As the ages progressed, buttons lost their significance as other displays of status replaced them. In more modern times, the couture houses in Paris took care in choosing a button for its fashion. But the days of wearing art on your bodice or sleeve were over. Or so it may have seemed. Designer Elsa Schiaparelli, who lived from 1890 to 1973, was a key figure in Paris fashion between the two world wars. Acknowledged by her contemporaries as the style arbiter of the 1930s, Schiaparelli's creations mirrored the social, political, and cultural climate of her times. She drew much of her inspiration from her close ties to Parisian avant-garde of the 1920s and 1930s. In 1935, the Maison Schiaparelli opened in the Place Vendôme in Paris, selling collections designed for sports, city, and evening wear. This jacket was made at essentially the same time as the previous jacket by Lanvin, but the ever-daring and visionary Schiaparelli transformed the buttons on her jacket into artistry that may have veered toward the political. The butterflies, colored blue, white, and red, the colors of the French flag, may have referenced hope despite the turbulence in France at the time as the nation continued to cope with the devastation of World War I and the ensuing depression, and began to face the ever-growing fear of Hitler's Nazi regime. Buttons also reflect the art movements of their time. Louis XIV preferred stately and reserved classicism during his reign, while the rest of Europe's art and architecture evolved into the lavish and dramatic Baroque style. After his death, France adopted this trend, and the Rococo period was born. Rococo is the age of Watteau, Fragonard, and Boucher. Their colorful, happy scenes were full of elegance, ornament, pastels, and movement. These buttons show the Rococo influence on buttons. The large button features the hairstyle that Marie Antoinette and her court made so popular. It's ink with wash on paper under glass. The button at the left is an enamel plaquette set in metal with an elaborate Rococo border. The cherub is done in monochrome émaux peint with added gilt highlights. The other two are porcelain, painted with scenes of 18th century style lovers. The rediscovery of Pompeii in the 18th century and new archaeological finds there not only ushered in modern archaeology, but also the era of neoclassicism in architecture and art. The arts were greatly fueled by Johann Winckelmann, the first modern art historian, who published Thoughts on the Imitation of Greek Art in Painting and Sculpture in 1755. Winckelmann declared Greek art as the most perfect from the hands of man. This renewed interest in Greek art was applied to buttons throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Here we have two 18th century buttons. The first is the Wedgwood jasperware set in steel. The button on the far right is a painting of Clio, one of Zeus's daughters, on silk under glass. The head of Zeus is a 19th century transfer on porcelain, a type of buttons collectors call Liverpool transfers. These buttons got their name not because they were necessarily made in Liverpool, but because John Sadler and Guy Green of Liverpool claimed in 1756 to have invented transfer printing. Transfers were used to decorate pottery made by several Liverpool factories. Gothic revival became a widespread movement in the first half of the 19th century, particularly in England. Admirers sought to revive medieval Gothic architecture, intending to complement or even supersede the neoclassical style prevalent at the time. Its roots are intertwined with Catholicism and a reawakening of Anglo-Catholic belief as a reaction to the growth of religious nonconformism. The 19th century buttons here each reinterpret Gothic motifs. The round stained glass windows known as rose windows, the knight in armor, heraldic devices, quatrefoils, and crockets, ornaments in the form of curved foliage used on gables and spires, Gargoyles, dwarves, birds, oak leaves, and linen fold, carved ornaments representing folds of linen, are other common Gothic motifs. Two of the buttons shown here are enamel and the others brass, two of them with cut steels. Art Nouveau was a protest against industrialism and mechanization. It aimed to contrast natural, undulating, and graceful forms with ugly, mass-produced objects. Its roots grew from the writing and philosophy of John Ruskin and his pupil, William Morris, who led the arts and crafts movement in England. It was an international style of art, architecture, and applied art, especially in the decorative arts. Forms borrowed from nature included vines, lilies, sinuous leaves and stems, butterflies, dragonflies, peacocks, swans, and water lilies. Women are its muses, depicted in gowns inspired by antiquity, often with long necks and lush flowing hair. They exude empowerment and sensuality. The buttons here exemplify Art Nouveau. The three on the left are of brass, one with enamel, one with a large glass jewel and cut steels, and the third with metal openwork. The large button is hallmarked silver, and the one to its upper right is brass. The last button is a metal openwork dragonfly with pastes. Art Deco first appeared in Paris in the mid-1910s and flourished in the United States and Europe during the 1920s and 1930s. It has its origins in the bold geometric forms of the Vienna Secession, an art movement started in Austria in 1897, and Cubism. From its outset, it was influenced by the bright colors of Fauvism and the exoticized styles of art from China, Japan, India, Persia, ancient Egypt, and the Mayan Empire. During its heyday, Art Deco represented luxury, glamour, exuberance, and faith in social and technological progress. In jewelry design, designers including René Lalique and Cartier started to introduce colorful gemstones such as small emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, as well as featuring less expensive materials. Most of these buttons are plastic, primarily casein and celluloid. The small fabric flapper is a garter button. The buttons you've seen barely scratch the surface of what can be found pictured on a button. The variety and richness of decoration are endless. The next few slides give a closer look at materials used to make buttons. The development of celluloid started as an accidental discovery in 1855. In Birmingham, England, Alexander Parkes found that the thick solution of nitrocellulose, alcohol, and ether used in the early photographic process turned into a solid after the solvents evaporated. He patented this discovery as a waterproofing agent for fabrics. In the 1860s, an American, John Wesley Hyatt, acquired Parkes' patent and with the help of his brother Isaiah began experimenting with it. Eventually, in 1870, they were able to create a substance resembling a horn-like material and patented the process, calling its product celluloid. Because of its capacity for imitating ivory, celluloid was soon used to make many items, buttons included. The first is called ivory because of its ability to mimic carved ivory. Wafers are thin pieces of celluloid with surface decoration. Some are incised with fine designs, and some have colored or metallic paints, tints, and cut steels. Celluloid was often used as a shield to protect a lithograph underneath. This early 20th century button is called a glow bubble. It has a hollow body with a translucent area in its surface design that reveals the foil underneath that gives it its glow. Shell has been used to make buttons for centuries. You've seen some examples of simple utilitarian buttons made in the US. The examples here demonstrate various techniques that have been used to make some exquisite pearl buttons. Carved pearl buttons are wonderful. Like shell cameos, they reveal different colored layers. This button has an enameled ornament. And here is a simple background of pearl used to offset its mounting. Transfer designs were also applied to shell buttons. In the 20th century, plastic took many forms, including bakelite, casein, acrylic, nylon, and polyester, to name just a few. The potential of these synthetics was tremendous, and the button industry embraced them to the fullest. They could be worked in a wide variety of techniques. Identifying the type of plastic used for a particular button, though, can be challenging. Here, buttons are labeled if their type of plastic is known. This slide gives an overview of how buttons can be classified by material. The international standard for classification has been developed by the National Button Society and is detailed in its Blue Book. The Blue Book can be purchased on the Society's website. There are 3 button backs pictured as well. Button backs and the types of shank can often help determine not only the base material of the button, but its age as well, and if marked, where and by whom it was made. This slide identifies the techniques used on the buttons. This is just an example of all the button types and the various techniques that were used to create them. In closing, here are some tips for those of you that are interested in learning more or starting your own collection. The Blue Book is an essential resource for those who want to dive into the NBS classification system. Button Country is a visual encyclopedia of buttons that is set up according to the Blue Book classification system. It is available on the NBS website. There may be a button club in your area, and they are sure to give you a warm welcome. Go to the NBS website under Events to see what's available near you. You can also pick up a great book about buttons. They're loaded with pictures of buttons of all kinds. Whether you want to buy buttons or just learn about them, auctions are another resource. Many different specialized buttons auctions take place every year in different parts of the US. Google button auctions to find auction houses who hold online and in-person auctions. And lastly, there's nothing like the camaraderie of other button collectors. Local and regional button clubs are listed on the NBS website. Thank you for joining us today, and in spite of all the great information, buttons will still surprise you.